Will it be the type of pain that grows us, or the type of pain that reminds us what could have been? I really think most of the time we stop, not because the path was wrong for us, but because we somewhere along the way forgot that most of life's best experiences and circumstances and opportunities come with a hefty price tag. They demand a lot of us, and in those moments when the lights shine the brightest, when we feel the weight of the world coming down on us, it's easy to misdiagnose that discomfort as a stop sign. It's like, oh, I feel alone, I feel unsure, I don't have any validation, my pride hurts, my confidence is shaken, whatever it may be. These things just, even as I'm saying them out loud now, seem awful, when in reality, they're just the cost of admission, right? It's like you have to not know before you can ever know, but try telling yourself that as you're wandering around feeling nothing but pressure, right? It's a different story altogether, it's a challenge, but here's the good news. It's a challenge you're capable of handling, of overcoming. Life is about stepping into things we don't feel ready for and then learning repeatedly that we can piece together the knowledge along the way. It reminds us that fear is going to show up regardless of what we do in life. But to grow into the people we are capable of becoming, we have to understand that fear is in its own unique way an invitation. The discomfort doesn't mean something's wrong, often the opposite. It's letting you know that more is available, that you are right where you need to be. But you have to change in order to become worthy of. What's on the other side? Life is not saying no. It's merely demanding of you. Courage and courage you have. Music, how much did you care? What do you mean? I didn't understand the question at first. In that room, how much did you care what they thought of you? Like if 0 is not at all, and 10 is, you cared a lot. How much did you care? 8. I said probably around an 8 out of 10. And that is the problem, because if you care, you are not free. I've been working my whole life to obtain that word in its true assent, freedom, and I made progress. The world around us is tough to change, but most things worth changing are tough. I've uprooted and walked away from people that brought me down plenty of times. I've walked away from places that just weren't me. I've committed to carving out a path that I deem meaningful in my life. See, but you can always turn your back and walk away from people, from places, from situations. Here's a little caveat. No one seems to tell you about, though. You have to take yourself with you. There's no destination to which you can arrive without your thoughts. There's no place you can show up without your narratives or your view of the world. And the more I navigate this floating rock we're on, the more I'm convinced that weather is determined by the onlook or not the atmosphere. Some people simply choose to see sun, some people choose rain. Our forecasts are internal. I've referenced this book often because it's one of the few cheat codes, not to any subset of reality, but to life in general, that allows us to reverse engineer true contentment. It's called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying by Ronnie Ware, where she speaks with mostly older people during their final days, asks them what they would do differently if they could do it all over again. Regret number 1, and we can actually stop right.
There is, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the one others expected of me, meaning the number 1 thing people wish they did differently was careless. They wished they'd lived in their authenticity, put more weight on their goals and their dreams than those of strangers that pass like ships in the night. Every time we repress who we are, our future selves shed a tear. And I know that's not pretty or uplifting to think.
About a future you looking down and wishing you'd sought out that freedom in its truest form, the freedom to live fully? But look, sometimes carving meaning out of life just isn't pretty. Sometimes what's necessary is not pretty. See, everything's relative, and perhaps understanding that it's not others who are the judge, but it's instead that older version of you sitting on the bedside reflecting back on this one roller coaster ride. Maybe that's who we're living for. That's the well from which our courage should be drawn. We are guests passing through a miracle with minds that falsely and irresponsibly whisper. We have all the time in the world trying to convince us that the trip lasts forever, but it doesn't. Your life is a raindrop in a thunderstorm. It will be over as fast as it arrived, and how you choose to live. It will be everything. See the world always in some capacity? Exists that voice asking you to dial it down. There will from time to time be sweaty palms and shaking knees, you know, those human things. But when you find yourself standing on the edge of that door looking out at a world that you know calls your name, let your voice be louder than all of it. Let the beating of your heart be stronger than your fear. And if you can't do it for you, then please do it for that version of you, years from now. Looking out the windows, smiling about how you almost said no. You almost boxed yourself in. You almost let what matters pass you by. But instead you captured life like a child, chasing down a firefly, that in a world of constraint, you allowed yourself to be free. I was in Arizona last week. Got a chance to interview Joe Polish, best-selling author and founder of the Genius Network. Because I was sort of making my way around the Genius Network office with my coffee that morning, I noticed in one of the meeting rooms there were some quotes hanging on the wall. One of them was Joe's that said, "Be willing to destroy anything in your life." That is an excellent, that's certainly a big statement. I started thinking about my little corner of the universe, running through all the things that might not meet that standard of excellence in my life, and a few certainly came to mind. It was freeing to think about, but could excellence really be a standard for everything? I mean, that's a high bar, and so I wrote it down, a little reminder to bring it up later during the interview a few hours. Go by mics are rolling. And I asked the question, so be willing to destroy anything in your life. That is an excellent, beautiful quote. But how? And, Joe smiled, kind of paused for a sec, says willing. Right, the key word there is willing, and I'm paraphrasing. But his point was essentially it's an acceptance of what is and a willingness to be rigorously honest with yourself, music. Because, look, there's not an athlete, entrepreneur, parent, or student who didn't have to at some point play broken. We all do. But to live like that, that's not a life well lived. That's learned helplessness. That quote on the wall is about taking a stand. It's the moment you say, I want a new standard for my life. I'm going to be more assertive, more caring, more aware. Excellence is not a requirement per se, because human beings can't be excellent all the time. We are flawed. We are trying, we are growing. But what you can do is look around you and start moving towards that version of yourself. Start cutting away the metaphorical chains around your ankles in his book. What's in it for them? Joe highlights British Olympic rower Ben Hunt Davis, who had one standard for the men in his boat. One question that would be asked every time they were confronted with the decision. The question was, will this make the boat go faster? If no, then it's not for them, and this framework guided their journey. This contributed to their success. This clarity, this line of sight, it's an awareness. We can all learn from understanding that we're not shackled to yesterday. We're not tied to the old stories, the old relationships, the old ways of living. No, our paths are not dictated by what was, but rather our willingness to be aware to ask the questions that position us towards our north star. And as the conversation was winding down, Joe pointed to a quote from the movie Vanilla Sky. States, every passing minute is another chance to turn it all around. Change doesn't happen without the understanding that more is possible. That perhaps you'd been conceding too much while asking too little of yourself. Perhaps you've been surrounding yourself with inadequate resources. Maybe you've been building walls that, without your knowing, it became self-induced limitation. And yeah, excellence in every single aspect of life is unobtainable, but what a beautiful standard, what a journey to embark upon, a horizon to chase down. And the point is not to recklessly destroy your current reality, but to build a bridge connecting what is to what can be. It's loving the reflection in the mirror, enough to know you are better. You can be better, you will obtain better. You need not be perfect or flawless, but you must be willing to destroy anything in your life that isn't excellent, and music of the world reflects back at us what we currently are, like a giant mirror, projecting the movie that's playing in our heads. We lay on the horn in traffic, not when we're at peace with ourselves, but when we're in duress. We gravitate towards the negative, not when we're living in abundance, but when we're living in scarcity. We quit, retreat, contract. Not when we're confident in the road ahead, but when we're doubtful, alarmed, in other words. We find out in the world what already lives within us. Life, in many ways, is not absolute. It's evidence. It's evidence that we'll use to justify the things we already believe. Wayne Dyer used to use the metaphor of an orange. It can be squeezed and squeezed and squeezed, but there will never be grapefruit juice pouring out of an orange. No. Grapefruit juice doesn't live there. You can only find on the outside what lives in the inside. You can only extract from the orange juice Recently, a good friend of mine said to me that they'd like to change their financial situation. To which my response was perfect. You most certainly can, right? Like anything. Yeah, it'll take work and some planning and some restructuring, all that good stuff, but you most definitely can. And his response was, sure, that's what all you motivational people say. Okay, smart guy. Now you're an example on a podcast episode. Congrats, why? Because you want the people around you to realize how much is possible for themselves, right? It's not sorcery or witchcraft to believe something better is possible. In fact, if one doesn't believe it's possible, they're effectively cementing their feet to the ground, at least with regard to the particular precise, let's face it. You don't begin journeys that are not possible. We don't allow ourselves to do that, and so to not believe in an outcome and somehow still wish for that outcome, well, that's essentially our orange metaphor, right? Can't squeeze financial freedom out of a mindset that only sees monetary constraint, believing it's possible. Starts the journey, see. There's so much pragmatism in growth. You know, people talk a lot about the law of attraction, and yeah, I get it, right? It sets targets. But the picture of, let's say, a dream house on your wall is not why. You'll eventually have the dream house. The picture of the dream house on the wall reminds you. It helps you believe that you're someone capable of someday acquiring that house, obtaining that type of success, which results in you, wait for it, doing things that help bring that to life. It is the doing, but the doing must be connected to belief. Mid-20s, I was unhappy, wanted more, but didn't really believe myself capable of obtaining more. Right, that was the issue. Back to the old orange, expecting grapefruit juice. Can't get results in an area not conducive to their creation. Right? It wasn't until I said, you know what? Maybe not definitely, but maybe it could happen. Maybe I can take control here. The odds have to be greater than 0%, right? There's Jim Carrey and Dumb and Dumber. So you're saying there's a chance? Yeah, it's like starting out. That's all you need, a chance. The door cracked in the beginning. I just needed to convince myself something different was possible. The beginning of transformation, and that internal change prompted how I interacted with the external world. You do things differently when you believe differently, or if you want to phrase it another way, believing that you can bring something to life doesn't guarantee that you actually do. But believing you can't guarantees that you won't. And why not? Stack the odds in your favor. I often juggle back and forth between the philosophical and the tangible, or the tactical, right 3 ways to do X, life hacked to change. Why, yeah, of course, life does in so many ways come down to the tactics, to the how to the steps. But does that even matter if you don't believe in the pursuit? Does it matter what Google Maps says if you never step out your front door? You have to convince you. You have to create an environment in your world where change isn't crazy, more isn't absurd. It might be challenging, but it's possible. And possible is enough. It is enough to begin, enough to step out, enough to see the trivialities as tools and the resistance as part of a beautiful game. Remember that the world is a mirror reflecting back at us, our world view. We find what we look for. So give yourself permission to look for things that make life beautiful. Give yourself the gift of believing change is possible. Music. What's the difference between paying a fee and paying a fine? The answer to this question may not be as small or insignificant as we're inclined to believe for it. I recently picked up the book The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. It lays out some valuable concepts and ideas about it, investing and managing our finances, growing our wealth. But there's one idea that I wanted to share because, yeah, from an investing standpoint, it's important, critical even, but it's relevant to so much more. And I think an understanding of it will help us in many aspects of life. So first, let's start with the financial piece, and then we'll sort of grow the metaphor, right? Because Housel talks about how we should look at investing in the market, and one of the hardest things for us to deal with is the market's volatility. And it's difficult for us to invest our hard-earned money and then see the market go, let's say,
For example, down 20, like seeing that huge dip in our investment, that's not fun, right? Everyone knows that. That can be nerve-wracking, and it dissuades a lot of people from investing or keeping their money in when they should. It ultimately keeps them from getting the returns available to them, right? But here's the point he says, those people who see that volatility as a fee and not a fine are more inclined to win in the long term, understanding that market returns are never free. They demand a price, and that price is the roller coaster ride we all have to deal with. That is the market. It's the ups and downs and highs and lows. That volatility is the cost of admission. And if you understand that, you're more inclined to stay calm. Keep your long-term vision. You're more than likely to come out on top on the other hand. If when that turbulence arrives, you know the sudden crashes, the ups and downs, and you see it as a fine, as this terrible thing that's happening to a punishment, you're more likely to act emotionally, to be reactive, and make decisions that aren't in your best interest to drive the point home. He mentions Disneyland, for example. The fee is $100, and people will gladly pay that fee because, you know, they get that great experience with their family, their kids, that they'll have for the rest of their lives. That $100 isn't a fine, it's not a punishment. It's an intentional, deliberate trade of one thing for another. And if you were to look at it as a fine, you'd never get to enjoy that experience. If you thought that $100 was a punishment, I just wouldn't be the same, right? So why do I bring all this up? Music, because I'm a firm believer that the best things in life all come with that price, or a fee as household states. But I also think we sometimes have a tendency to look at that cost, that very same cost of admission, as a fine as a problem, when really, no, it's just trading some turbulence now for a reward a little bit down the road. Sometimes the right thing is the hard thing, the uncomfortable thing with dividends. It will pay. So long as we understand that it's opening the door to something greater, leaving a situation, you know, is not good for you hurts, right? We've all been there. We all know this in some capacity. But it's not a punishment or even a bad thing, right? That discomfort associated with walking away is a fee that will enable you to live a more aligned life in the very near future. Now, let's say you're building something meaningful, something you care deeply about, but it's just you, and the idea there is no validation, certainly no external reward, not yet. And continuing forward in those moments is hard. It's taxing, emotionally draining even. But this feeling, again, isn't a punishment. It's not a fine. It's the fee. It's the cost of admission to bring something into life that wasn't there. Life's greatest moments are expensive. It's just, are you going to pay the fee to bring it about with a cost of regret at a different time? Then you get the point, right? You can take this and apply it to so many things: falling down, criticism, feeling lost, having to start from the bottom. These things are not fines. They are fees. They are price tags. And so often the initial price is a bargain compared to what we'll get back. We just need to stop perceiving their mere existence as the world working against us. No, these are opportunities in disguise. It's easy to walk by the important things, to dismiss the uncomfortable things. The harsh truth is that our greatest opportunities are often intertwined in our distress. That's why so many people walk away from the things that will make their lives better. That's why so many people pull their money from the market when it takes a dive. So many people walk away from a project or idea when things get challenged. Oh, conversely, it's why so many people do nothing at all. They stay in situations they aren't happy with and know they need to change. Because the fee to get from point A to point B feels too steep. But I think the value is in comparing the discomfort, the cost, the fee to what it's going to bring you down the road, because often it's a bargain. We need to remember that what will ultimately provide has life-changing potential. Understand that resistance is not a fine. It is not the world telling you, it's live asking you, hey, do you really want this? Because if you do, it's yours. So long as you sign the dotted line and pay the price, most people will be dissuaded by this. Most people will turn and walk away, but most people also leave a hell of a lot on the table. And I don't want that for you. You don't want that for you. The world we live in is one of abundance. So when life pushes back, understand that it's merely positioning you to move beyond your limits, to redefine your worldview. And while admission isn't free, it's well worth the price. The other day I heard someone say that they found some of the most important things in their life in places where they weren't supposed to find them. Which is interesting to me, one, because that seems to happen a lot. And two, because it's like, who creates the parameters around what we're supposed to do? Who sets the rules to begin with? You know, I'm continuously blown away by our tendency to create imaginary walls and then live within them to build steel bars around ourselves that separate the now from future opportunity. First videos I ever made, I talked about this nagging feeling of discomfort that occurred right after I left the corporate world and started my own business. And at that point, to call it a business was giving myself a lot of credit. I was basically just starting to make videos and put them out on social media. But I would run in the middle of the day, right? That was my thing, right? Through Boston, along the Charles River. I loved running, but I couldn't help feeling this guilt, like I wasn't supposed to, like I was doing the wrong thing. Doing what I was taught not to do my whole life. Learned that you go to school or work during the day. That's the right thing. In a decade removed, I've grown and I've learned I know how crazy it sounds now, but it took me a long time to even enjoy it and not feel like some deviant who was leaving everything he'd worked for up to that point to go and fail spectacularly right. They're supposed to follow it me around like a shadow, constantly trying to hold me back in freedom. To me, is separating oneself from this exact sentiment. It's doing what's best for you, exploring your own worldview. Blazing, as the saying goes, your own trail. Because you'll find very few supposed twos there. I think this is a microcosm of a greater truth. The most important things we do in life are pivotal moments. Our epiphanies are found where we weren't supposed to find them because what we're supposed to do is very rarely methodically thought out. It's simply the norm, it's marching orders, it's what the crowd is doing. It's what will help us blend in. And it's interesting as I've pushed further and further into life, I've come to believe that rarely is what's best all one thing or all another. It's working to find a balance that supports your ideal life trajectory, right? That balance will lean substantially more one way or another depending on who you are and what's important to you. And so I'm not suggesting one always needs to be different or if something is common, it's wrong. No, the sands of years of evolution and societal stressors have in many ways narrowed it down for us. What's effective and efficient? It's helpful to survive and to dismiss. This outright is obviously counterproductive, but it does explain why any break from these norms physically hurts. We associate them with survival. And here lies the divide between surviving, which we are supposed to do, and excelling, which is to embark upon a different game altogether. Survival is mitigating risk. Excelling is hunting down the opportunity. Survival is blending in. Excelling is asking what about me is unique, and how can I dive into that? Fully survival is not having to innovate on any large scale because the instructions are clear and laid out for you. Excelling is asking, now that I know the rules, how can I bend and maybe even break them so that I can improve my life and the lives of those around me? Now continue with the same example, because I know a lot of folks find themselves in a similar situation now. I wasn't supposed to deviate from my previous life trajectory, my education, my career track, my 401k, but I did, and I found something others would never have, an ability to work on what I enjoy and share that with others. I wasn't supposed to leave home. The Northeast, the most important people in my life live up there, but I found comfort, peace, and new beginnings down here that I never would have experienced. I wasn't supposed to do many of the things I'm doing today. You and curiosity and a willingness to chase down what's meaningful. And the beautiful thing is anyone can do that. Every single one of us can detach and depart from the supposed twos in our lives. And hey, maybe some of them should be there. Maybe some are adding value and stability that you need. And maybe even cherish, but I can promise some of them aren't. And it's worth a look, it's worth thinking about those things. Where can we be a little braver, a little more courageous? Where can we venture outside the scope of what we've subconsciously deemed everyday life? I love the notion that there's always more in you. You just need to give yourself permission to pursue it, right? It only makes sense that no journey begins until we give it the green light. The world is yours once you give yourself permission to pursue it. So what are you conceding? What have you accepted as a fact that upon further review, you might find to be fictional? There's a world of infinite opportunity waiting for you,
just past your acceptance of the way things are, just beyond all those supposed to you belong here. This was something that was said to the class during yoga the other day. Thank you.